Welcome to the Startup Builder live Q&A. This is the place for any startup founder to ask any burning questions that are keeping you up at night and get answers from experts who have worked with hundreds of founders and their teams. My name is Sarah Bell and I'm your host today. I'm a co-founder and startup building advisor at LeapSheep. This is Kirk Drage, who's also co-founder and CEO of LeapSheep. Our mission is to support founders to build startups that solve real problems and can scale. We've both worked with hundreds of startups and their teams using our startup builder system to support founders on the journey to product market fit and avoid the core startup mistakes that typically send founders to the startup graveyard. Welcome to any founders who have joined live. It's great to have you here. You're welcome to drop any questions that you have in the comments and we will prioritize those. We've also received a few questions from founders who have sent them in. Now today, I'm welcoming Eric Schudiske to our live Q&A. Eric, welcome. Eric is the founder and CEO of S2S Public Relations and Communications, a boutique communications firm that's focused on venture-backed startups in the impact technology space, such as life sciences and climate tech. He's a former TV journalist who previously covered the President of the United States, major technology companies, and breaking news, including hurricane coverage. Eric uses his skills in media and storytelling to support startup founders with both getting PR, developing their thought leadership, and social media collateral to accelerate their ability to raise capital and get traction with customers. Eric, it is great to have you here. I would love to hear how you went from covering the president to now supporting startups.
Yeah, absolutely. Pleasure to be here with you, Sarah and Kirk. Yeah, I think as the concept of my career and what impact I wanted to have on the world, I always wanted to be where the most important news was being born. And in the United States, it's oftentimes with the U.S. president. So I covered the president in my career, and then as I evolved, I fell in love with technology, and I fell in love with the concept that one person can make a difference across billions of people across continents. And I really found that founders of startups are those prime movers in these ideas that will shape the world, not just for the next decade, but for the next centuries to come. I think about this with our founders, that there are founders from Rome 2,000 years ago who decided the size of what would be our railroad tracks today, that someone's concept today could inform decisions thousands of years into the future, is really a powerful sentiment to what everyone who's listening to this call is doing, trying to impact not just their lives today, but the lives for generations to come. And it's hard not to want to be involved with that. And what we find with founders is we want them to be really good at the science. We want them to be really good at the product, and we can do the communications. You know, in television, I have less than 7 seconds to make someone care. And that's really what we're trying to tell founders that they should think about when they're pitching investors, when they're talking to potential partners, is how do you make them care about that problem? And it's probably not in a spreadsheet. You know, that's not found in a spreadsheet. It's found in how you communicate the size of the problem and the personal belief you have in that you're the individual with the team and the technology to solve it.
Great. That's a really great description, because that's 7 seconds. And I wonder, like, 7 seconds is obviously kind of critical for some mediums, but I know for things like TikTok and more other social media platforms, it's not even 7 seconds now. Sometimes it's one, which brings whole new challenges, as Kirk and I are discovering.
I mean, it's such an important skill. I mean, it's always been an important skill. I think the thing that, you know, if you're a founder listening to this, the thing to really understand is it's becoming a more important skill, because as we've got this deflationary effect on building technologies, where technology is getting cheaper. You know, think about, you know, the original .com boom. You had to raise capital to build your own data center if you wanted to, you know, be a software company, a SaaS company. Whereas now things are getting so cheap, and because things are getting so cheap, there's an explosion of products and services. So it's getting cheaper and cheaper to build products. But what that means is that all those products are now competing for attention. So it's getting harder and harder and harder to actually get your message to a customer, and it's going to continue to get harder. And if you don't get good at this, you're going to be challenged as a company that's trying to be successful.
Yeah, and I think that that's such a point that's so well received, because the economy now is the attention economy. Can you get someone not to listen to 0.7 seconds, but 7 seconds? And when I write a pitch to a reporter, all I care about is the subject line. And then the 90% of what I care about is the subject line. And then I care 10% or 9% about the first sentence and 1% about everything else. Because if they don't read the subject line, it doesn't matter. And if they don't read that first sentence, it doesn't matter. So just get them down the funnel, those few steps. And if you get them to the second sentence, you probably have them. You've captured their attention.
Such a counterintuitive reality, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But it's so true. It's so hard to internalize what you've just said, but it's so true.
Yeah, and I think it's also, there's so much noise out there as people are trying to compete for our attention. One of the metrics that we use with our clients is called share of voice. So we look at all the articles that their competitors have and their articles, and then we, add the numbers, like how much volume do they have in the conversation that they're trying to be involved with, whether that's a technological or societal conversation. Are they the person leading that conversation? Because that's a position you want to be in. You get to decide what topic is next then. So we want them to have a large share of voice. So it's not just, these discrete individual wins when you get an article, but it's also the long-term strategy about how you can not just gain, but maintain that top spot in terms of attention. So there's a lot of opportunity out there for founders, especially those who are passionate and verbose, to help refine that messaging and really target where they want to reach in terms of their audience.
Yeah, it's a great way to think about it. Really good way to think about it. And of course, that's not going to happen overnight, is it? It's going to be a journey to get there.
Yeah, and it usually does involve some training, but there's a lot of intuition that goes into it as well. And what we really want from our founders is for them to be really good on one channel. Are they really good on Twitter? Are they really good on Instagram? Can they do something where they produce one piece of content per week? Is that a really good thought leadership piece on LinkedIn? Is that reacting to an article on Twitter or X? Is that a quick video on TikTok that helps people identify a problem, to make sure that they're maintaining that cadence? Because eventually along a founder journey, someone's going to try and knock you down. Someone's going to try and refute your facts. Someone's going to try and topple your ideas. And you have to make sure that you're positioned with a strong story, because you have to own your own narrative. So that takes a strong cadence to it. It takes a discipline. It also takes, a lot of strategic direction. Where do you really want to expend your resources? And Kirk and Sarah, I'm sure you know that's the time component that all the founders deal with. I only have X amount of time in a day. What should I allot for which activity, which will give me the biggest bang for my buck?
Yeah, fascinating. I want to pick up on something you just said there, which I think is super important, which is learn one channel first and go too broad on too many channels.
Yeah, which is a question that we've got, which is really all around, like, how does a founder decide which channel to select and then get really good at?
All right. This is one that will be counterintuitive to everyone on the call. One channel that you should consider, depending on your vertical, is Pinterest, which should floor people, because it's not where people go to influence. You get LinkedIn, you get Twitter, and those are such combative, politicized platforms that if you have the right product, Pinterest, which has 88 million monthly users here in the US, is really a powerful platform if your demographic is women 25 to 34. So it's really finding that channel that works best for you. Oftentimes, we'll make sure if our B2B to customers are on LinkedIn and Twitter or X. It's hard to get out of that habit. So LinkedIn or X are kind of the primary channels that we want to make sure you're visible on. And the reasons: LinkedIn is a channel that you're going to attract partners, you're going to attract your potential colleagues. It has some visibility, although not very much, into the investor ecosystem. X is a place where investors live and thrive and communicate. So we want to make sure that you're both visible to investors, but also you're going to need to build a team. You're going to need to influence potentially policy, but have to be involved in conversations that are germane to the area in which you hope to disrupt. And that's going to attract partners to you on LinkedIn. So we have definitely had the case where we have stood up very robust LinkedIn presences for clients, and the doors have opened for inbound interest in working with their company because of the content on LinkedIn. Twitter is more rapid fire. Twitter wants you to post 18 plus times a day. So there is a burden to it, but we find if you post once a week on LinkedIn and 3 times a week on Twitter, you kind of have some table stakes there. You're still relevant in that topic. And what we need on the PR side is a place to point someone. Reporters, before they decide to do a story on you as a founder, will do what your mom might have done when they found out that you have a startup. They're going to Google you. And they're going to trust those results more than they trust anything else on the internet. More than a news story, more than paid advertising, more than social. 66% of people trust search results more than news stories. The trust in news stories is sub 60% for sure. So you want to make sure you're showing up in a trusted environment, and that's social or that's search. And to do that, you need to be consistent with your content production. So that might be having a blog, that might be posting on Medium, that might be a Substack. But what I want you to do is have one place where you're constantly posting, so I can send a reporter to that channel, and they can see your thought process, and they can understand you as someone that they might want to interview, understand the value that you're adding to your industry or the industry you hope to disrupt, ideally. And that can entice them to email back. But we do know before a reporter emails back, 60% of them will check your social channels. So if those aren't active or those don't align with the story that you're pitching them, they're not going to email back because they receive dozens of pitches per day.
Okay. And I'm going to come back to that topic, Eric, because I think, the point at which you're communicating with journalists is important. Before we go to that, though, I am just going to ask you this, because I think this is something that we work with founders with all of the time, which is how do I position myself as a subject matter expert? Like typically founders usually have an idea. That's where they typically tend to start. And then, of course, they, in an ideal world, they go out, meet customers or potential customers, understand the problems that they're trying to solve, then build an MVP and work on that with potential customers to see if that's viable and customers love it. But then alongside that, there's also this work of positioning themselves as an SME. Like, how should early stage founders do that?
So much of what we've discussed so far in our conversation today kind of leads us to that, and just to kind of back up that SME pitching. And there's a few ways to gain access to media. You want to be a resource to a member of the media. So beginning relationships early via your X feed by DMing reporters is important. So you're starting to form relationships, even if you're just saying you appreciate a story and they should consider X or Y angle. That's important to start positioning yourself as a subject matter expert. The first and probably the fundamental piece of advice here is to have an opinion, have a perspective. That's what's going to drive the news media to be interested in you. It doesn't have to be overtly controversial. It doesn't have to be contrarian to the common view, but it does need to be pointed, and you need to back it up with some element of research, some element of due diligence. Oftentimes we'll place academics as subject matter experts because they have a PhD in a certain subject. But I think, and I know founders can also establish themselves through their research, but demonstrating that through a single channel, as we discussed already, and having demonstrated engagement in the wider community will be important. Do you go to, and all founders tend to do this, do you go to trade shows? Do you go to conferences? Can you position yourself as a speaker at a conference? That'll make yourself so much more valuable to a reporter who wants to interview the person who is the global leader or has a global insight into a certain topic. And being placed on a panel, being a speaker at a conference is a really good lever to pull to raise your prestige, to position yourself as a subject matter expert. So I think kind of laying that out in very clear bullet points. One, make sure you have a very searchable history of your expertise in a subject. So having that on one channel is important. Having a company that's innovating in the space, also important. If you want to have a PhD in that subject matter, that's useful. You can consider that. It takes a lot of time. It's kind of boring, but you can also do that. And then, use that expertise to work yourself into either a speaking engagement, work yourself onto a panel, or achieve some sort of an award from a business journal that's regional in your area. Either that's like a 40 under 40 award, something that allows you to stand out or differentiate yourself from the average person on the street who might also have an opinion on your subject matter, if that's cryptocurrency or something that people tend to have a visceral reaction to. You want to make sure that you're as differentiated as possible and that you have a unique perspective as well. And then, backing way up to our original conversation, can you articulate that in 7 words? Because that's what you're going to need to be able to get that in. And what we use when we pitch journalists as well is we make sure we hyperlink them to a paper, to a video. This can be really useful, to a video of you on LinkedIn talking about what you're very interested in and how you're disrupting an industry. So there's a few pieces there, but fundamentally, content that supports you as a subject matter expert, something innovative, a unique idea or concept, and then demonstrating that publicly by placing yourself on a panel or exercising kind of a public arena. And then at that point, engaging with journalists to try and position yourself in a very concise message. So 4-step process, that could take anywhere from 2 months to 6 months, but it's very doable, especially if you're purposeful in that.
Yeah. One of the things that we talk about with very early stage founders who are just starting on that journey is on finding other thought leaders in the space and then starting to comment on their LinkedIn posts. And of course, then kind of build up the practice that way. And then, of course, you can start to develop a reputation and just having that opinion. And I mean, we've, some of the founders that we've worked with can suffer a little with imposter syndrome. And so it's like, actually, if that's too much for the first step, then think about how you would do it and share that internally if you have a team. So like, how would you present or how would you comment on this? And just kind of building up that expertise and then kind of taking all of the steps that you've said already. Just, dealing with our because I think the space that S2S plays with is slightly further down than some of the founders that we work with. So just bringing that into the very early stages, just to kind of lengthen that journey that you've just explained so eloquently, Eric.
Yeah, and the value of being a subject matter expert is beneficial to you in the fundraising environment, especially.
Yeah.
If you think about, I know, Kirk, you're an angel investor as well. When you think about investors, they want to see the person who's leading the narrative in a subject is also the person who's going to be the best position to affect change. So being very content driven, and one of the easiest pieces that I just lied. It's not easy. It's not an easy piece for me. It seems easy because I don't typically. It's easier for me because I've done it a million times. But what we want people to do is produce 300 words of why, the why statement of what they do, and make that very publicly discoverable. So if you have a website, our mission, and break down the why of your mission in 300 words or less, and make it personal and make it mean something, is a really good place as a exercise to start as a first-time founder or an early founder. What is my 300 words? How can I condense this? Because that really becomes a magnet to draw the right people to you, to draw investors to you. And you can point people like, what are you working on? And you can just send them that link to your website. And why does it matter? And answer that in those 300 words. It can be really powerful.
Yeah. And linking back to your comment, Sarah, about the very early stage founders, so often we're working with founders and bringing them into that customer discovery phase. So, if you're a founder with an idea, we advocate, for starting in that customer discovery phase so that you really understand your customers and understand their interest in your potential value proposition before you ever build a product. And for clients that we work with that have already got a product in market and perhaps struggling to get the traction they really want and need, often the answer is to go back to that customer discovery phase and re-examine some of the fundamental hypotheses of the business. What's the right market segment? What's the right problem to solve? What's the right solution, etc. When you're in that early phase, we find that there are different types of individuals that need different types of treatment. Like if you're coming from a deeply technical background where you've got some real expertise in something and you're commercializing that strength, then you're a real subject matter expert maybe in the solution side, but you're probably going to have to grow your understanding of the market side of your business. And that is going to play out over time as you build your strength. And on the other side, we meet a lot of founders that they understand a problem, but they have to create the solution. They might have to go find a co-founder or other people that are going to help them build that solution. So they're definitely not an expert in the solution, but they really understand the problem space. So I think one of the key things about this question is the definition of a subject matter expert is very broad, but ultimately I think where you want to take your business is you want to become the subject matter expert on the business of the problem and the solution together and be known as both. And that's a journey.
Yeah, and when as you're speaking, you talked about audience discovery or the customer discovery journey. All I heard was content. That's such rich content for you to develop and produce, and you really want to become the historian of your startup.
Yeah,
because that will be really important and could become such valuable learning. And I think that's the foundational element of news, is those first three letters is new. So if you can find something that's new in your customer discovery, that's really critical. And that could be a valuable piece of content that could help establish you as a subject matter expert.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting.
One of the key questions we get from founders is, well, don't I need a product before I can go start talking in the market? And that's absolutely not true, is it? It's the journey that you're undertaking and what you're learning about the problem.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, that's one of the questions that we had as well, because I think, and reflecting on our own experiences here, Kirk, we did not do enough to establish ourselves as thought leaders before we had a product. And then, and we continued, I think, to over invest in referrals. And of course, if you're not developing yourself as a thought leader, it means that not only are others developing themselves as thought leaders in your space, who perhaps don't have that same level of expertise that perhaps you do, but they've just done a lot more. And in fact, now that I've put the question on here, I think we have talked quite a lot about this, because really, if you're thinking about developing yourself as a thought leader before you have a product, you're developing yourself as a thought leader in the problem. So you're creating very problem-aware content that resonates with people who have that problem in the market. Yeah, Eric, I'd be interested in your views on TikTok Go on, carry on.
I just wanted to go a little bit deeper on that point, because it's so important, both because we have made that mistake, and like so many things on the startup building journey, you learn by doing, and it's expensive. And so the more you can avoid those things, the better off. And so for new founders, early founders that are starting off, the earlier you can get on and start building your profile, even if you don't yet have a product, the easier it is going to be for you to get your product to market and get customers in the longer term. And some of the best examples I've seen are people that really act like journalists, and they say, "Hey, like I'm not a subject matter expert on this, but I'm going to interview a lot of people that are subject matter experts in the problem or the industry or in the solution space." And I mean, you look at someone like is it Steve, the Diary of a CEO? He's interviewed so many people, and he's now seen as a thought leader because he's just interviewed so many people. I mean, he's done some amazing things as well. I don't want to take that away from him, but there's a really important aspect of this journalist aspect that I think all founders can take advantage of. Is you don't have to, and this gets back to the imposter syndrome thing, Sarah, you were talking about. You don't have to feel like you are the world leader in expertise on something to actually build your profile and become a world thought leader in that subject.
And I think the key element in the entrepreneurial journey, and I think what often starts it, is that same concept around curiosity. And I think that's the key element in becoming a thought leader.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then as you say, it's sharing that curiosity with an opinion.
All right, I'm going to go on to another question because that's absolutely right. Now, the question is this one. So, what's a newswire, and how would I use one strategically? Is this a good time to bring this in, Eric, in terms of the flow of our current conversation?
Yeah, we can definitely address it, because I think founders will at some point come across this topic, and I can unpack it because they're used fairly liberally. So a newswire is, we'd consider that paid media. So you have three types of media: you have earned, owned, and paid media. So just kind of making sure everyone's on the same page. So earned media is, you are in the Wall Street Journal, congratulations. Earned media, that's an article. You have owned media, which is, you wrote that why statement, why the problem I'm solving is the most important problem of our century. That statement, that's owned content. And paid content is an advertisement. So a newswire is a piece of content, oftentimes a press release, almost always and exclusively a press release, that you will put up on a wire, and there's a charge for that. So they're going to pay you to distribute that across the internet. And the higher the price, typically the further and more prestigious the distribution of that wire. What will often occur, because you've done a newswire, is you're going to build SEO. So we'll use this as a general tool to help drive SEO and awareness, because what will happen behind the scenes in the inner workings of the internet is you'll have all these links now to your website, because you'll include links in the press release. It'll be on sites that have pretty high domain scores. So your domain score will rise as well, and you'll rise in search results as well. As discussed earlier, search is what people trust the most. So there's a value to newswires, but there's also a price tag to newswires. There's a few trigger points that we like to consider before doing a newswire. Typically, funding is the driver for most startups at a certain stage to do a newswire. Is it your seed funding? Is it your Series A? Is it a follow-on series or a bridge? So there's a few reasons on the funding spectrum to do a newswire, but also, did you get a new headquarters? Did you hire the right person, a new CMO, a new CSO, a new co-founder? Are they joining the team? Have you grown 100% in the past 2 months? There's a lot of other inflection points, strategic partnerships, new product releases that are also reasons for newswires. What we do on the PR side is we just don't put out a newswire. We often use that, and we have one scheduled to go out for a client on Tuesday of next week, and it'll be in Germany and in the US. So we do work globally. But we have followed that, actually preempted that by doing embargo pitching. So we've sent out the newswire to a list of reporters we think would be interested ahead of the newswire, so that they could tell the story simultaneously. We could get some of those earned media pops, which we know have much more value, especially if you're a founder and you want to amplify those. That Wall Street Journal, I use that. And I don't want to use it flippantly, because it's very hard to get in the Wall Street Journal. Very hard. But should you get a media placement that matters to you, even a niche industry placement, amplifying that on social media is really important. And you can get that from a newswire as well. Oftentimes, you'll find that a newswire, especially the ones we use called Business Wire, will end up on Yahoo News, is a typical one. Sometimes will be in other publications that people would recognize and have some esteem to them. So you'll want to amplify that on your social to use them strategically. And then, you want to think about distribution of any news that you're using or cultivating, and you may want to consider using a newsletter. We find that is so effective, because you have a list of people who are interested in following your growth, and you can send them the information you want them to see. And open rates, especially for founders, are typically fairly high. So you're not spamming people, you're using them quarterly. So to roll a newswire, any media pickups you get from the newswire in a newsletter is important. You can send that through LinkedIn as well. Posting, of course, on social channels. And then a sneaky way that I like to use media pops and a newswire could be included is to, underneath your signature line in your email, is to say, see our recent news in Yahoo Business or Yahoo Finance. And then I like to track that link because I'm very interested in how many times that gets clicked. And, you can kind of correlate who's clicking that through. And that's a very passive way for you to have some influence and raise your prestige a little bit, as well as to include just a link to that newswire if you were to use it underneath your signature line in your email. So there's a few ways, not just the newswire, but also how do you distribute it after it goes live. And you can include that on your website. If you're a new founder and you don't have media yet, consider it just a banner on your homepage. Usually you often have a one-page site. Include a banner that has the badges of all the media that you've been on. So is that, Wall Street Journal, Yahoo Finance, or even your local newspaper or a tech publication, TechCrunch, on your website, so that people get that implied credibility that you exist, you're in the ecosystem, and you're pretty large, and you have some really good searchability. So there's a bunch of ways to use it strategically. Those are kind of few top of mind.
So I'd love to just, great to hear that about newswires. How should founders go from establishing themselves as a subject matter expert to then kind of going towards media coverage? Like what's the trigger, and then what are the steps that founders can go from there towards having a newswire?
So there's a triangulation to media, right? So there's a moment in time where your news is really important. So what we're looking for with media is what, as a former journalist, we'll call a hook, or we'll call a peg. Why does this matter now and it doesn't matter in a week? Why does this matter now and it didn't matter at all until right now? So what's the immediacy with your news? So oftentimes we find that that's funding. So you need to find an inflection point for your news, but it can be self-generated as well. Sometimes we'll think about, what is our market traction? Do we bring on a really valuable partner that we want to talk about in the media? That can be an inflection point as well. And those would all generally be press release driven. You can also, kind of try to bring a reporter behind the scenes to your growth journey. A little bit harder to do. You have to have a relationship with the reporter typically before pitching them. You also have to have kind of a rainbow at the end of that journey. Something big needs to happen. So it could be you received a patent and you're in the process of getting a patent on something that's really going to be life-changing for a lot of people. And you could bring a journalist in before that, kind of walk them along in the journey, the product iteration, the early templates, the designs, the expense. And then when you receive the patent, they can publish the story at that point. So there's really moving from SME to, how do we generate news, really depends on oftentimes business traction. And that will be important in your journey as well. But that'll be the proof that you're actually doing something. And that's what people want to see.
Thanks for that, Eric. So to that point then, and we've had a couple of questions come in about this from founders, like how do I know which journalists are the right ones to build a relationship with?
So this will start for you in a few different ways. So it'll come from you organically. What publications do you read? Who do you trust in that spectrum? So that's one way that people identify reporters. I read New Atlas, which is a great kind of scientific publication, breaking news science constantly. Maybe there's a reporter who's always talking about something that's close, but not exactly what you're working on. That's the one that you want to follow on X, that you want to try to engage with occasionally. That might be the right reporter if you establish some rapport. Another way is to create a Google alert. So you can create a Google News alert for your topic, your innovation space, and potentially also your competitors. So who out there is, you're the best, of course, as a founder. You're the one who's going to make the difference. But who's second best? Who are you going to displace? Track them, and who's writing on them? Who's writing on them most consistently? Because they're also clearly interested in that space. and you have a perspective to share.
Mm.
So track people who are reporting on your competitors, find one who's writing the most or two who are writing the most, start following them on X and engaging with them on X. So those are kind of two paths to find a reporter that you might have more luck with than not, because they have already established an interest in where you're innovating, or you might just be really interested in the work and you follow them and engage with them, and they could just be the right reporter who's more of a business reporter, but maybe not specific to you. And there's also, there's a saying in news that all news is local. So is there a local reporter who can give you that initial lift and the initial searchability? From a hometown newspaper to a local business journal, they're going to have, that's their job to report on this geographic area. And if you're someone who's disrupting technology globally and you're in their hometown, they might want to hear from you about what you're doing. Usually you'll need some momentum there. Do you already have some funding? Have you already, developed a prototype? How far down the road can you get before having to contact them to show them that you're the one who's doing the job? And that's where SME, subject matter expert foundation building will be important as well.
One of the challenges we see all the time, which I'd love your view on, is as a founder, you're quite often an expert in something. Let's just say you're an expert in AI, and so the media that you're consuming is very central around that expertise that you have, and then you decide to start a company that's going to do AI for healthcare, and your target market is I don't know, it's cardiologists or something. The media that you're consuming is different than the media that your customers are consuming. Can you talk a little bit about how you've coached founders through that journey to see media through the lens of their customer as opposed to media through their own lens?
Yeah. I think that's such a critical point of view, because you'll come in with your own bias, right? There are publications that are not germane at all to a founder's journey that our clients love to be in. And some that just don't matter at all, that really matter to their customers, to them as individuals. And that's something that we talk, especially scientific founders, through quite a bit, where they will think that, of course, having a peer-reviewed article published is exceptionally important as an academic, not so much as an entrepreneur. Getting a story that's very broad sweeping into a mass publication that reaches your end buyer is your goal. And I think making sure that as an entrepreneur, your goal is to be successful. This is your job professionally. I have to be successful. To think about setting your biases aside, what is my quickest and most efficient path to being successful? Oftentimes that's just making sure you have a robust network and people can support you because they're aware of you. So we see an awareness gap as this huge detriment to building successful businesses. And that's our job, to eliminate that gap. And if as an entrepreneur, you find that you're very immersed in cardiology AI publications, but know your buyer is really hospital management, right? Like, these are the people who are going to make that decision. It just takes that really big step back to go, what is our final goal? But also, I think from a PR perspective, if we can, and we've done this, and it's always great to see, is once you land a publication where you can see the inbound interest, and you can see the website spike, that's the proof that people need to see.
Yeah.
And that kind of is then like the next step is the polarity switch, whereas opposed to outbound PR, we're starting to do much more inbound PR, where journalists on their own find the startup and they're interested in telling the story and begin to contact us. And there's a very real moment in every customer journey where, now they're known. And now they're receiving outbound interest from reporters that would not have been interested except for the validation that they've already achieved because they've done media more and more, because they have this foundational owned content that is searchable. And sometimes that's not through the publications they really read and they really love. That's through publications that their customers really believe and trust. And that's really important. And there's ways we can demonstrate that to founders, but really it's helpful just to see it.
Yeah. And what's your advice to founders about their own media consumption?
I often advise that they set, it's kind of Google alerts. And I spoke to a class of entrepreneurs at our local university here, the University of Washington, recently, and I pulled them on their consumption of media, and I was very pleasantly surprised. I was very afraid that they just shut it all off, which, as a former journalist, I think would break my heart, because I believe so much in journalism. But I love news aggregators. So if you can do Google News or Apple News and receive kind of this unbiased look at the news broadly, that will be important. And then I do believe in setting alerts on topics, so you can kind of see where that trend goes. I subscribe to no fewer than 20 newsletters, from different publications, just so I can see the trend lines in media. And we have some very sophisticated software that can track that as well. But I do think having subscriptions to, where you want to show up in the media is important, and to track those and to track individual reporters. So if I were a founder, I would set an alert, and I just spend 5 minutes, and I think that's all it takes in the morning, to look through alerts and read headlines. And then as the compulsion strikes you to dig deeper and start bookmarking reporters and storylines, because what's most important to a reporter isn't the story that they just told, it's the next story they need to tell. And we know founders have that concept. Like, it's such a powerful tool to use as a subject matter expert, to say to a reporter who just told a story, like, this is a great story, and your next story should be insert your expertise here because X, Y, and Z. Because and we do this with some really, really powerful but very obscure science. Because there's just that next beat is so important in the news cycle.
That advice you gave there about 5 minutes in the morning, consume your media, I think that's super important, because and sometimes as a founder you're so focused on being productive, you want to get your product release out, or you want to work on your marketing copy or whatever. It's just really important to be tuned in to the media and the channels, because ultimately, if you want to be part of the conversation, you need to understand those channels.
Yeah, and I think one of the ways that we help founders see the value and exercise the value of just that 5 minutes is that can be their social content for the day. They can find a story that they're passionate about, or totally miss the mark. Like, we don't have to agree with everything. And I think there's even a point to say, this is far off base. The real story here is X or Y. And that's really powerful content that you can produce on your channels. And, as someone who likes to be hyper efficient, if I can spend 5 minutes a morning making sure that if an investor asks me a question about, a company that's recently in the news, I have an answer. So that's one use case. But also, I'm developing content that helps establish me as a subject matter expert, because I'm spending 5 minutes in the morning reading a Google alert or reading Apple News. So there's a lot of use cases to it. It's going to make sure you're not going to get caught flat-footed when you're in your next pitch meeting.
Yeah, really important. This question we've had a couple of times. Like, once you get media coverage, what should founders do with it? Like, do they self-promote? Like, how do they make the most of it? And I've got another question as well from another founder that I'll come afterwards around how it can go wrong. So I'm interested in your kind of expert opinion on how to make the most of media coverage first.
Some of this, we'll go back to what we discussed a little bit earlier. Like, you want to make sure that the logo so we're going to presume, to the next question coming down the road, that this is positive media coverage in an outlet that you believe has value. So that's one. So you're going to take the outlet, you're going to put it on your website. I don't typically I don't put hyperlinks on that. I don't need people clicking off my website to read an article. I want them to ask me about it. So, you're in Forbes, tell me about that. Or, so I want that to be a conversation point. So I rarely would suggest linking to that. Maybe if you're sending investor materials, you put the hyperlink in those materials. So one, website, make sure it's publicly discoverable, post it on social media, do the newsletter, include it in your pitch deck. I definitely know founders who will have a slide, and there are investors who love it, who love that you're already in the media, who love that you already have a presence, who want that to continue. and also then want to come along on that ride with you. Investors love to be quoted. So think about how you use that media that you've gained very early to help your business goals and to, check that box of being successful. So those are some. And then of course the signature line is always a nice sneaky one as well, making sure it's included there. And then it's not a single moment in time, so we have a story that's going to pop in the next week or two in a great publication, and we're not sure. So this will be inside baseball. We're not sure if the name of the company is going to be mentioned in the article. So we're working with the reporter to put all the arrows pointing to this company. So after the story pops, we're considering doing a media release or a news release that will drive the SEO. So should someone Google, this technology in this context, our client shows up. And then we're also then using the quote sources we know that the reporter from this publication spoke with on our own channels, and then drawing that causality. So sometimes you don't get the media you really want, but you have to draw that as close to yourself and your company as possible. And there are mechanisms to do that. One of them is proactively sending out a news release. We won't mention the publication in the news release, but we'll have all the elements so that, as people who might be interested in this technology search it, we're going to show up front and center, because we know others will try and potentially claim ownership over that technology. So there's ways you really have to be smart about it. But there's a lot of ways that you can own that, and we want you to own your narrative. And part of that is making sure that the coverage that you're mentioned in is coverage that is also searchable on your website. So oftentimes we haven't mentioned this yet, to have a news tab on your website. News, and then oftentimes that can be combined with a few others, but we do like a news tab on a website.
Got it. And that news tab, would it have links to specific articles and coverage?
Then I would.
Okay.
But on your homepage with badges, I typically want it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So on the flip side, I mentioned, so we've had a few founders that have had this happen where they've been featured, particularly in GeekWire, but it could be anywhere else, as a new founder. And then it led to a flurry of interest and potential investors, but it meant that they got really distracted and nothing actually came of it. So with that in mind, how should founders know what kind of attention they should follow up on after getting media coverage, and what they should leave?
Okay. Yeah, this gets really complex, because I'm interested in some of the details, because there's interest but no funding. So there's a piece there that would be really interesting to unpack at some time. So was it not funding ready? What were those conversations? Or, because I'm in Seattle, I'm very familiar with GeekWire, were the investors more tire kickers? Were they just people who wanted to learn a little bit more? And I think, Kirk, you talked about these lessons that you learn as a founder. I think that's a lesson you learn as a founder. There's going to be investors who want a lot of information, who ultimately don't pay off with a check. And I think that's difficult. And I'm going to try and get to give you an answer to that question. So how do I know which attention to follow up on? When we do media, and maybe this will help kind of triangulate the answer. When we do media, we always try to do media when our clients are ready for funding. So S2S, which is the name of our company, is seed to series or Series A to Series B. So we're really trying to triangulate against your inflection points for venture capital. So we would typically kind of announce an innovation or partnership right ahead of you trying to close the last 20% of your Series A, to help drive that investor interest. Or because you're always fundraising, announcing a Series A is a great time to then start beginning to build your list for your Series B investors. And then you can take a hard pause on having those investor conversations for however long you feel comfortable with. But the individual investor contacting you, how do I know how to follow up? I think that's something that founders learn through the questions that the investors ask, the diligence that they're requiring, what check size are they potentially offering, do they fit, the type of investor you need on your board, is another way to vet them. And I think those are really good questions to ask as you're thinking about replying to those emails, because I believe in boundaries are great ways to maintain a very happy and healthy life. So I don't reply to all emails, and I don't anticipate anyone would reply to an email from me if it wasn't germane to them. So some of it is just like, all right, maybe there's a hard stop on replying, or maybe you have an auto reply and you send them to a Google who might be slightly dismissive, but they might not be the investors for you anyways. Send them to a Google form and get a little more information before you begin that conversation. And that might dissuade them completely, which means they're not meant for you. Or it might just get you that much further ahead. It might also demonstrate that you're getting a lot of inbound interest and increase that fear of FOMO.
Yeah.
So there's a few ways to navigate it, and none of those might work for you because all the pieces aren't quite there. But those might be some ideas for founders to consider.
Of course, part of the answer here is that, particularly when it comes to investment, investment is just a sale. It's a sales process like anything else. You're selling equity in your company, and you need a sales funnel. You need to understand who your ideal customer is, which is an investor in this case. Who's your ideal investor? So knowing who you would want to take money from and who you wouldn't want to take money from, and having a clear sales funnel, just like you're selling your main product. And so being prepared, if you know you're getting in the media and it could attract investor interest, making sure your sales funnel is set up for inbound. So, just like you might have a link tree on your LinkedIn profile that allows founders to come into your sales experience on your product, you can put a link in that link tree about investors. Here's what you need to do if you're an investor. Here's a form to fill out. As you say, if you want to contact us about a potential investment opportunity, whether maybe you're not opening a round yet, so you can say, if you want to be notified when we open a round, here's the form that you need to fill out as an investor.
I love that. That's a strong play too. I think especially in the startup ecosystem, people tend to be so hungry for funding that they're taking a lot of meetings, they're doing a lot of calls. But I think there's some chutzpah to saying, all right, I'm diligent about this. It also shows an element of discipline. It's super hard to do. Super hard not to, like, someone might want to give you money. Should I take this call? But yeah, the Seattle ecosystem for funding is pretty unique.
Yeah, it sure is. Now, this question is a pretty important one. We've talked a lot about all the ways that you can get PR media coverage. When is the right time in a founder's journey to bring on board a communications consultant? Be interested in your thoughts on this.
Yeah, and I'm going to quote, because I did listen into a really wonderful conversation yesterday with a crisis comms PR person through Graham and Walker. So to give them credit for sourcing a wonderful speaker. And her answer to that, and I'll have different metrics, but one of her answers to that is you should be spending 10 to 30% on marketing communications when you're above 250,000 in gross revenue. So to think about, if you want people to buy your product, people need to be aware of that product. So you should be investing in a communications consultant when you have a product to sell, when you're looking to scale. So if you're looking to scale 10 or 100x, you're going to need to invest in a communications consultant, either on the marketing side or the PR side or both, or the paid side. And we do, elements of all of that. But having that person in when you're ready to drive revenue or drive investment, I think is critical. If only to do a sweep of the messaging on your website. This is where we typically begin with clients, because we can drive interest to your website, but if they just bounce off because they don't understand your technology or your value proposition, it's not a good investment for you. So really think of your branding and messaging on your website. To Kirk's point, make sure that you have a funnel. make sure you have a value proposition, make sure people can engage with you, make sure there's a clear call to action on your website. You can get them into the top of your funnel, that they're beginning to engage with you on social. You have social channels. So all that is important, before you begin to start to try to build your user base. So there's a few points. There's that one metric from the brilliant PR consultant from Graham and Walker, but that's one and kind of more on the financial side. I always say when you're ready to begin receiving investment, at scale, or you're trying to scale, or you're ready to receive credit card numbers, that's when you start doing PR. And typically we try to front end that by 1 to 2 to 3 months to make sure that the messaging is there, so that we can make sure that's an effective process for you, both in terms of making sure it's very sticky, but also making sure it's cost effective for you. So there, and it's always, we often hear from investors that people either spend way too much way early or don't spend enough and they haven't started and it's way too late. So finding that sweet spot is really, really important.
And how does that relate to product market fit? Like, should founders wait until they've got some indication that they've reached product market fit before bringing on board a communications consultant, or is that too late?
I think it's case by case, but we are working with a client who does not have a product market fit, like not even like way off. But what we're doing is we're helping them source the right audience or community to beta test with. So what we're working on is, how do we make sure that their website has the messaging to appeal to the community that they want to beta test the product, so they can begin to consider scaling. So that's very early in terms of their pre-revenue. So that's kind of on the early side of the spectrum. But I think if you're to consider bringing on a communications consultant, having those conversations probably a little bit earlier will be important. And I think the price tags are always a little startling sometimes to founders, to think about what is your budget and how do you want to consider that as well. And happy to talk about that as well.
Yeah, I like all that. I think, just to draw out, one thing that you said there is you're working with a founder who's got a clear goal of a beta. So it's an early pilot, launch. They're not trying to launch to the world. And I think founders having clarity around their goals can really help answer the question, is it the right time for me? And more importantly, what do I want to get out of the engagement? And this is where I see founders overspending, perhaps with agencies that are not as savvy as you are, because you understand the founder journey, which is rare. There's a lot of agencies that are just really working with established companies, and so they don't appreciate the innovation journey, and therefore they have the absolute best interest of the founder at heart, but they end up overspending on the wrong things. And I think that's where the biggest challenge is for founders, is getting that kind of advice and guidance that actually, unhelpfully, it looks very helpful, looks very genuine, looks very authentic, working with someone that's got a lot of experience and a lot of credibility, but it turns out to be a bit of a money pit. Yeah,
and I think what we haven't covered is, and this is going to be tough to hear, you actually have two products as a founder. You have your product, and then you have yourself. And those two things won't always combine, right? So we want to build equity, not just in the innovation you're driving, but also in you as a founder, as an innovator, so that when those things decouple, you're taking a lot of that equity with you, so that your next founder journey is faster and more thrilling and more fun, and more successful than your initial. So you get to learn and grow, but there's oftentimes founders stay very far below the radar, and it doesn't serve them well when they try to get back into the innovation game again.
Yeah, so true.
Okay, we are almost at time, so I'm just going to thank you, Eric, for being on the call today with Kirk and I. It's been an absolute delight to have you here and have these conversations. So in terms of how founders can get in touch with you, so you can follow S2S PR on LinkedIn. They have a newsletter that you can subscribe to. And if you're interested, you can go straight to their website. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, it's S2SPR.com.
You got it.
Yeah. And then click on Let's Talk to book a consult or an intro call if you'd like to go into more detail about your specific circumstance with Eric. Now, if you are a founder and you would like to learn more about how you can work with LeapSheep, I'm hoping I'm just showing the right screen here. Here we go. Let me just, hang on 1 second. I can see that I've got the questions. Okay, here we go. If you are a founder and you are working flat out to get your startup to product market fit, we have a newsletter for you, and the QR code is on the screen. The LeapSheep Startup Builder newsletter delivers clear step-by-step guidance to accelerate your progress, and it's free. You can join the growing number of savvy founders who rely on Kirk's insights to navigate the startup landscape and to avoid the startup graveyard. And it's accessible to sign up just with this QR code here. All right, that has been our live Q&A. Thank you very much, Kirk. Thank you very much, Eric. And we will be back again in 2 weeks when we have Jen Wren from Venture Us joining us on the call. All right, thanks ever so much.
Fabulous. Thanks, Eric. Great conversation.